Hello, everybody. This week's Parsha is Parshas Yitro, the Parsha of Kabbalas Torah. It's interesting that the name of probably the most significant Parsha in the entire Torah is named for a non-Jew, Yitro. And it's actually not the only time that we do this. On Shavuos, when we read a Torah, we read the Parsha of Yisro, Parsha of Kabbalas Torah, and the Megillah that we read is Ruth, another non-Jew. In fact, the names of Yitro and Ruth have the three letters exactly the same. Yisro just has one extra yud. The question, of course, comes in, why? And it could be because anybody who is a religious individual, no matter what religion you're from, has to ask themselves the question, is my religion correct? Is the only reason why I am an Orthodox Jew is because I know that my religion is true and more than any other religion, or simply because of the fact I was born into an Orthodox Jewish family? Had I been born into a Christian family or born into a Muslim family, the chances are I would be a devout Muslim and Christian. So how in the world do I know that my religion is more correct than anybody else? So it seems that the Torah is giving us an example. That Yisro is from the outside. He was a person who was an Oved Avodah Zarah. He tried every other Avodah Zarah, and he actually came to an objective conclusion that the Torah was correct. So he is the example of what I'm looking for somebody who's striving for Kabbalas HaTorah. However, this answer really doesn't really suffice because he's only one person. In fact, if I go by the numbers seem to not be in my favor that Judaism is correct. There was once upon a time where there was no Christians and no Muslims in the world. We were here first. And yet now you look at the world, there's so many more Christians and so many more Muslims. Is it possible that the majority is correct and that we are wrong? How do we know that our religion is the true religion? Now, there's an interesting machlokes that goes back to the beginning of our parsha. When exactly did Yisro arrive? In the beginning of the parsha starts before Matan Torah. It seems that Yisro arrives on the scene in Machane Yisrael before Matan Torah. But if you look into the Gemara, there seems to be a major debate whether that is true or not, each side providing scriptural support for their theory. And many people hold, the Ibn Ezra, for example, holds that Yisro, in fact, arrived after Matan Torah, whereas the Ramban tries to go always tries to keep the Parshiot in chronological order whenever possible. But even according to the Ramban, who says that he can't, according to the Ibn Ezra, who says that Yisro arrived after Matan Torah, so then the question is going to have to be, then why in the world does the Torah give us the impression by writing his arrival beforehand that he actually arrived pre-Matan Torah? So the Ibn Ezra says as follows. Listen to the answer the Ibn Ezra gives. And he says, B'savar k'shehizkir lamala, hara she'asa Amalek l'Yisrael. If you look at the last story that the Torah tells us at the end of Beshalach, one of the last stories, it's that Amalek came attacked. And here it's strange that after all the miracles that were done in Yetzias Mitzrayim, the 10 plagues, Kriyas Yam Suf, Amalek would come and attack the Jewish people. So therefore, since that was the last thing, a negative idea that's mentioned, Yizkur Kenegdo Hatova Sha'asa Yisrael. Therefore, the Torah compensates for that and places the story of Yisro, who basically, when he hears of the miracles, he comes to join Israel. That should contrast the negative of what happened in Amalek. And in fact, how did Yisro come to this decision? If you look at the first pasuk within this week's parsha, it says as follows: Vayishma Yisro, Kohen Midyan, Chosein Moshe. Yisro, who was the Kohen of Midyan, who was the father-in-law of Moshe, he heard. It's kol asher asa Elohim leMoshe u'Yisrael amo, everything that God had done to Moshe and Israel, his people. Ki hotzi Hashem es Yisrael miMitzrayim, that God had taken the Jewish people out of Egypt. I met a Rebbe, one of my high school Rebbe, Rav Nissen Alpert Zichrono Livracha. He had a beautiful vort, and he had a simple question on the wording on the text of the first pasuk. We already know who Yitro is. We know all this information. Why do you have to tell us that he's now the Kohen Midian and the Chosein Moshe? And especially, besides being unnecessary, it seems to be degrading. The man is coming to join the Jewish people. Why bring up his negative past? Why mention that he was for many years the Kohen Midian? And Rav Alpert said that each phrase here, each term here is significant. It tells us who exactly Yitro was. Yitro, first of all, the word Yitro comes from the word yeter. Yitro was loaded. He had more than enough. In Egypt, he had rose to a position of power where he was wealthy and he was powerful. He was one of the 3 top advisors to Paro. And in fact, again, this is not mentioned within the text, but it is a chazal. Then when Paro was thinking of how to deal with the Jewish problem, he saw that the Jews were increasing in number and in influence, and he wanted to control that. He called in his 3 top advisors, Bilam, Yitro, and Eov. And he asked them, and he told them what he wanted to do. And would they cooperate, or do they have any advice on how he can basically put down the Jews? The response was, Bilam was enthusiastic. Whatever I can do for you, I'm at your service. Eov was neutral. He was silent. He was not either pro or con. And the only one who was against damaging the Jews was Yisro. How could he damage the Jews? They saved our entire country. They made us the superpower that we are today. They're loyal. They're patriotic. Why should we do anything? And Yisro would have nothing to do with it, right? And we know that. So Yisro, the first time you used the word Yisro, he had reached the peak of power that he could possibly have in Egypt. And when he realized that Paro wanted to use his experience, use his talents, use his intelligence to destroy the Jewish people, morally and ethically, he felt that was improper, and he wasn't going to have any part of it. That day, after that meeting, he came home, told his family, pack up your bags immediately. He took whatever belongings he could, left his beautiful apartment, left his office, left his professional career, left all his friends, everything that he cared for, and basically fled the country and left Egypt. He wasn't going to have any part destroying the Jewish people. So then he realized that if the world of university, the world of politics did not find any meaning, he turned next to a second career, the world of religion. He started off Shana Aleph, right, learning the Aleph base, got to Shana Bet, and spent a couple of years, eventually became a member of the Kollel. And after many, many years of restudying into a second career, he rose to the position of Kohen Midian. He was the Rosh Hashiva of Avodah Zarah in Midian. May not have paid as well in his second career, but at least he had followers, he had power, he was respected. And then what happened? Then a fellow refugee from Egypt arrived, a man by the name of Moshe Rabbeinu. And they started having discussions, the theological debates. And Yisro, even before Moshe arrived, was unclear about where he stood in Avodah Zarah. Moshe just was the icing on the cake. He left everything to finally, not only did he live his second career, not only did he give up what he had in Egypt, he gave up what he had in Midian to finally only be called the Chosein Moshe, to go into the Midbar and become the father-in-law of Moshe. So Rav Alpert said, you see, this is not a degrading description of who Yisro was. It was a man who was willing to give up everything for truth, right? How many years he worked up to his position in Egypt When he realized there was nothing left, he left it. Spent another 15, 20, 30 years working up second career. When he realized that that was a lie, he left that as well. A man that was constantly searching for truth. And Rashi continues on that vein. Rashi asks as follows. Vayishma Yisro, famous Rashi, Ma Shemua Shama Abba. What did Yisro hear that caused him to come and join the Jewish people? So Rashi says, Kriyas Yamsuf, Muchemes Amalek. He heard two things. He heard about the splitting of the Red Sea, and he heard the fact that Amalek came to attack. And again, it's clear from Rashi. He doesn't mention that he heard about Kabbalah Satorah. Rashi is going kind of at this point to follow, like the Ramban, that Yisro came when the Torah seems to say that he came after the war with Amalek. First of all, Rashi's question is difficult, and his answer is difficult. His question is, Mashum Shama Abba. What did Yisro hear? What do you mean, what did Yisro hear? What's Rashi's question? The pasuk itself tells you clearly what he heard. He heard as Kol Asher Asa Elokim LaMoshe Yisrael Amo. He heard everything that God did to Moshe and Israel. Ki Yotzi Hashem Yisrael min Mitzrayim. That God took the Jewish people. Everything involved in Yitzias Mitzrayim, he heard. So what's Rashi's question? What did he hear? And then if the question is difficult, the answer is also difficult. Rashi doesn't mention everything. He only mentions two things. He heard about Kriyas Yamsuf Muchemes Amalek. What about the 10 plagues? What about everything? What about the man? What about other things that went on? Right? Why and what, and in fact, why would he join him? I mean, it's one thing to join him when he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, but then to find out that after everything that went on in Egypt, that there were people that came to attack the Jewish people, that would cause you to come running. I remember years ago when the Gulf War broke out, and I was teaching in different yeshivas, and it was one of the few wars where there was a date and a time given as to when the World War would break out. And even though the yeshivas here were packed, and we're talking about frum Jews who supported Israel, who were believers in the cause, about 60 or 70% of all the yeshiva students from the United States went back to the United States. They're not going to stay. Parents weren't going to stay and allow their kids to stay here in the middle of a war. They were going to be attacked by Scud missiles. So why in the world, after hearing what Amalek did, why would that be the thing that caused Yisro to come? And why give two things? Why are there two events that he heard? So I'd like to say as follows. And here's where it's clearly where you have to look at every word in Rashi. Rashi's question is, what did he hear? That wasn't his question. The pasuk clearly tells what he heard. He heard everything. He added one extra word, Rashi. Mashmu Shama Uba. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? What was the event that sealed it? Not only did he hear and have, thoughts about joining the Jewish people, what was the event that actually made him pack his suitcase and come to join the Jewish people? Again, it's interesting they gave two events, not just one. He heard two things. The first thing was Kriyas Yamsuf. Now, what about Kriyas Yamsuf inspired Yisro to come? Logically, I would think, well, that was one of the greatest miracles that happened in world history. The Jews were about to be destroyed. I mean, a people being taken out of the most powerful country in the world, Egypt, and without firing a shot. They literally, there's some religions that will follow you if one person walked on water. Here, 3 million people walked through a sea. Imagine what a miracle that is. That's not necessarily what inspired Yisro. Because what bothered him about the Kriyas Yamsuf? What bothered him was not the fact that a miracle was done, because there were 10 miracles that were done previous to that. Dam, Sfardia, Kina, Makas, Bechoros. Rashi doesn't say that inspired, that also should have inspired him. So miracles happen. But what caused Yisro to start thinking was the reaction of his friend, the Egyptian general at Kriyas Yamsuf. He knew the guy. And he was in Egypt. He was an advisor in Egypt. He knew the man where he was educated, and he was a rational human being, and he was an intelligent being. If you were sent to bring the Jewish people back to Egypt, and you thought that it was one of the easiest military tasks that you have ever been assigned, You have 3 million defenseless people in front of you, men, women, and children. You're coming with today's equivalent of tanks and armed to the hilt against the non-combatants. And there's a ocean in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them. Gentlemen, we're going to do our job. We're going to come home tonight. We are going to be rewarded for the easiest mission we've ever had. Then all of a sudden, you see the Yam Suf split in front of you. And the Jews are beginning to walk through on dry land. If you had any intelligence, and you want to make a rational decision, what should be the decision of the Egyptian general at that point in time? Gentlemen, pack up your armor. Let's go. We're going home. But instead, the Egyptian general rushed into the ocean, caused the destruction of the entire Egyptian army. Why? You saw God. How could you possibly do that? That was the first thing that really got him thinking. But he said, you know what? Sometimes when you're stressful, sinna mekalkelet tashura. If you hate somebody badly enough, you don't think logically. What the Jews had done to the Egyptians, this is coming a couple of days after Makas Bechoros, destruction of the entire Egyptian economy, how they made them suffer through all those different plagues. The Egyptians were just so hateful that they weren't thinking rationally. Maybe that's what caused them. So, okay, so the Egyptian general gave the order to run through the Yam Suf. But then a second event happened, Amalek. How do you explain Amalek? Amalek also heard about everything that happened. The whole world knew what was happening. I mean, the Jews, at least at that point, maybe there was a historical issue that Amalek had with the Jewish people, but certainly not now, not for the past couple hundred years. And the Jews weren't coming to take over land from Amalek. They had really no reason to start up with them, especially you heard what God did. Who in their right mind would start up? And you're Amalek, you're not the Egyptian army. You are a nomadic people, which is nowhere near compared to the Egyptian army. That you would dare attack them a couple days after Kriyas Yam Suf? I can't explain a rational reason why you would do that. And what bothered Yisro at that point in time is, wait a second. You see from these two events that a person or a nation even can see the truth staring you directly in the face, that no rational person should make that decision, and yet you attack the Jewish people. Then I have to consider, well, what about me? I consider myself no less intelligent and no less rational or no more intelligent than these people. Why in the world? Maybe what's holding me back from finally packing up my bags and joining the Jewish people? When he saw the reaction of these two people, of these two nations, right? And he saw the Egyptians, he saw Amalek, he realized that maybe this is a psychological factor that everybody has, that it's hard to be objective, and they don't want to see the truth. And maybe that's been holding me back. He decided to pack up his suitcases and come. And that's what Rashi was asking. What was the events of all the events of Yitzias Mitzrayim that finally caused him to pack his bags? And it was these events. It's a different question than what the pasuk is telling me. And that was Yitro. Yitro was a man, so that we see two possible reactions, according to the Ibn Ezra. There was a reaction of a minority, a fringe minority, to Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that was Amalek, to come and attack, even though that wasn't logical at all. There was even a smaller minority of one person, Yisro, who looked at the events of Yitzias Mitzrayim and changed his entire life, gave up his position, gave up where he lived to come join the Jewish people. But then there was the majority people. Right? There's a third group of people that Yisro realized. What about everybody else? I mean, if you read through the story of Kriyas Yam Suf, we read it last week in Parshat B'Shalach at the Shira. Pasuk says, "Shamu amim yirgazun chilachaz yeshrei pulashes, az nevhalu alafei dom, elei Moav yachazemu ra, namogu kol yeshvei Canaan." The whole world was trembling. The whole world was frightened. The whole world realized that there was a Kriyas Yam Suf. So why was Yisro the only one that came? What made him different than everybody else? They were frightened, They didn't dare like Amalek come and attack. Certainly not at this point in time. So then why didn't they come join and pack their bags to join Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar as well? And here's a beautiful word that Yisro realized. The difference between him and the rest of the world, because Shmua, Mashmu Shama Uba. Everybody else heard the same thing that he heard. And they maybe thought about packing up their bags, but they didn't act right away. They let the moment pass. A day goes by, a week goes by, a month goes by. Maybe in a month, I'll rethink about joining the Jewish people. They allowed that momentous occasion to pass. The inspiration was gone, and that was it. And that's why Yisro says, that's not going to be me. Mashu Shama Uba. He immediately reacted the minute that he realized his mistake, he wasn't going to stay in Midian a moment longer. This fact, the fact that he realized that of the whole world, the only person who's coming to join the Jewish people was him and his family, and we don't even know how many members of his family. Certainly him and his one of his daughters and her two kids, Moshe's wife and children. He came to a conclusion that his educational philosophy has to change. What was his educational philosophy up to now? Again, this is hinted to in this week's Parsha. If you look again, the next psukim in the Parsha, Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Beis, it says, Vayikach Yisrael Chosein Moshe, Esipora Eshes Moshe, Achar Shulucheha. Yisro took Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe. Here it doesn't mention the fact that he was Kohen Midian. Again, why do you have to mention that he was the Chosein Moshe? Took Tzipora, the wife of Moshe, Achar Shilucheha, after Moshe had sent her away. We're not going to get into, what happened to Tzipora and her children. We know they came down to Egypt with Moshe. Why were they not with him at Yitzias Mitzrayim? Not for now. So what happened? Veit Shnei Banea, and her two sons. Interesting, they're called her two sons, not his children. Now listen, but here's the point that I want to concentrate on. Who were these two children? At Shem Echad Gershom. The name of one of them was Gershom. Kiomar, because he said, Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nachriyat. Because he said, who's the he, I assume, that I was a stranger in a strange land. V'shem Echad Eliezer. And the name of the other one was Eliezer. Because my God, my father was my helper, he saved me from the sword of Paro. Two things bother me by these psukim. First of all, it says the name of the first one, Shemo Echad Gershom. What should be the next pasuk say? B'Shem Hasheni. The name of the second one, right, was Eliezer. Why does he say the same thing? B'Shem Echad Eliezer. The name of the other one, was Eliezer. And also, the first pasuk says, why did he call him Gershon? Kiamar, because he said, Ger Hayiti. The word Kiamar is not repeated when the Torah explains why Eliezer was given his name. So the Baal HaTurim comments on the Kiamar, and he says as follows. Yal Gershon Ksiv Kiamar, Kiesh Darash b'Medrash. He quotes the Mechilta here. There's a Medrash. That Kishanasan Yisro Bito Moshe, when Yisro gave his daughter to Moshe, Hutzrach Lihitnot Shia Ben Harishon Lavoda Zara. That Yisro made a deal with Moshe. If you want to marry my daughter Tzipora, it's got to be on the following condition. Whatever children that you have, the first one is mine. What do you mean the first one is mine? Obviously, you're the father. What it means is I will direct his educational upbringing. I want him to be exposed to everything that I was exposed to, all the avodah zarah in the world. I want him to be able to make a decision on his own. He's not going to immediately be put into a Haredi cheder. And from child 2 and on, that'll be yours. And it seems that Moshe went along with it. Where did he get it? Ki Amar. So the Baal Turim seems to say the Ki Amar, he was talking about it was Yitro who reminded him, right? Because Yitro had told him, you are a stranger in a strange land. You don't have many options open to you. You want to get married, you want to have children? Well, there's no Jewish woman to marry here. There's no one else. You're a refugee from Paro. It's my daughters. I'll give you Sephora as the best that I have. That's my condition. Take it or leave it. Okay? And Yisro really believed in that. And even though, by the way, at the time that Moshe arrives on the scene, we have hints to the fact that Yisro had already abandoned Avodah Zarah. And one of the whole reasons why when the daughters came to the well, they had to come early in the morning because they got tormented by their neighbors. Because Yisro, who was the Kohen Midian, had already decided that Avodah Zarah was meaningless, and people were angry at him, and they made fun of them. That's why Moshe had to come in and help them. And it's ironic that even after Yisro had already decided that there was no value of substance to Avodah Zarah, he still wanted his grandchild to be raised in the ideology of Avodah Zarah, because he felt that the best way, right, and this goes back to what we talked about. How do you know that your religion is correct? How do you know that, objectively, that the way you've been brought up is true? You can't know that unless you've experienced and learned every other religion and come to an objective conclusion that your way of life was superior than everything else that exists. And that's what, the same way Yisro came to that conclusion, he wanted his grandchildren to come to the conclusion. And in fact, he's not so off. He's not the only one that came to that. Many great people came to the same conclusion. Avraham Avinu, for example. How did Avraham Avinu's father sold idols. Obviously, he was raised in a culture of Avodah Zarah. And yet he went through the different philosophies and he came up to the fact there's got to be one God only. Moshe probably went through the same thing. He may have gotten a Jewish education for the first year or two of his life, but for the other years of his adulthood, he was raised in the house of Paro. What do you think they talked about that? And yet Moshe also concluded that. So till that point in time, Yisro really believed in the idea of an open education, and people should be exposed to everything, and people should use their logic and use their intelligence to come up to an objective truth. But now, after what he saw was what should have been the logical reaction to Yetzias Mitzrayim, the fact that there were 10 plagues, the fact there was a Kriyas Yamsuf, certainly after the fact that there was a Kabbalas HaTorah, and that the Jews survived for that amount of time in the desert. What did they eat? What did they drink? 3 million people. That there should have been a reaction of the world. Any logic should tell you that this is the true religion. This is the true God. And why was he the only one coming? And then he realized, therefore, that even though for individuals, the idea of self-discovery might be the way to go, it worked for Avram and it worked for him. But for the masses, for most people, it doesn't work. For most people, right, they need to be taught the truth. And that's the best chance they have in coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This realization perhaps will help explain another problem that we have within the text regarding Yisro. If Yisro was this believer, and he realized that the Torah was correct, and he left everything. So then what happened? So when he got to the Midbar, what did he see in the Midbar? Especially if we assume he came pre-Matan Torah, and even if he came after Matan Torah. What was going on in the Midbar? The Jews were living miraculous existence. Man came from heaven. Water, and the bear, we explained this before, the Be'er Mirim wasn't just a small water hole. It was a river that 3 million people were able to get water from. He saw what was going on. He got shirim from Moshe Rabbeinu, who heard shirim directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sitting and learning Yom V'Layla 10 hours a day. For a person who's looking for the truth, there is no greater experience than that. And minimally, he was there at least for a year, at least according to the way we're learning it now. But what happens if you look in Bamidbar, in Perek Yud, Pasuk Chavtes, this is where after a year in the Midbar, Moshe, the Jews are about to leave. They're about to go to Eretz Yisrael when they thought it would be just a couple of days into Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe says, turns to Yisro and he says, Vayomer Moshe l'chovav ben Reuel hamidyani, Chosei Moshe. Again, we're not going to get into different names. There were 7 names given for Yisro, but here it's strange. It doesn't call him Yisro, calls him Chovav ben Reuel, the Midyani. Again, not the Chosei Moshe. A new description, not necessarily a positive one. The Chosei Moshe. And Moshe says to him, we're going to the place that God told us he's going to give to us. Join us. Right? Come with us. You'll benefit from everything that we're going to go through. So what would I expect the response of Yisro to be? Of course, I mean, I left Midian. I've been here for a year. I left there. I have nothing to go back to. This is Gan Eden for me. Right? Sitting and learning Yom V'Layla. V'yomer love lo elech. Wow. No, I'm not going with you. Ki im el artzi ve'el moladati elech. I'm going back to my country, to my birthplace. Why? So first of all, it's strange. Rashi says, why does he call him Chovav? So Rashi mentions here that he had several names. Who Yisro? Right? He's the same guy as Yisro. And then he says, why was he called Shmot Harbe Hayulo? There are many names to Yisro. Yisro Shem Sheyiter Parsha Achas B'Torah. He was called Yitro more than Yeter because he added an extra parsha to the Torah. Not many Jews have the schus to have a parsha written for them. Chovev al shechibe bet Torah, because he loved the Torah. So why in Bamidbar do we use the word chovev, chovav? Because he loved the Torah. If you love the Torah, then why are you leaving? And what's the excuse? I want to go elatziv umladati. Rashi says, im b'shvil nichsai, im b'shvil mishpachti. Either because of my material possessions or for family reasons. The same 2 reasons that many people give for not coming to Eretz Yisrael. I got family ties I can't leave now. I have business ties I can't leave now. But this is Yisrael. You already left already. You're already gone. Your bags are packed. You've been here for a year already. So in this week's Parsha, it's interesting. It also mentions the fact that he's going, I'm not going to get involved now. Why is it in Bamidbar and why in this week's Parsha? But if you look at the last pasuk in Perek Yud Ches in our Parsha, after everything that goes on with Yisro, it says, Vayishalach Moshe et Chosno. Moshe sends away his father-in-law. Vayelech lo el artso. He went back to his land. So here it's not that in our Parsha, it doesn't even seem that Moshe gave him an option. You're here, nice visit. In-laws I can only take an in-law for a certain amount of time. Pack up your bags, go home. The vacation and the visit is over. So Rashi says here, what does it mean? Vayelech lo el artso. What does it say? Vayelech lo. It should say Vayelech el artso. What do you mean Vayelech lo? Lo means for his own personal best interest. It doesn't seem to be in his personal best interest to go back to Midian. So Rashi says, L'gayer b'nei mishpachto. Why did he go back? To convert the rest of the people of his family. Now, I don't know who the other family members were. Because it could be that, in fact, there's, again, I'm not going to prove it to you from the earlier pasuk. There's a pasuk here in Perek Yud Ches pasuk Hey, Vayavo Yisrael Chosei Moshe Ubanav v'ishto Moshe. Everywhere else in the pasukim it calls Moshe's 2 kids Baneha, her sons, the sons of Tzipporah. This pasuk talks about his sons. Well, whose sons are we talking about? Are we talking about Moshe's sons? Are we talking about Yisro's sons? The subject of the sentence is Yisro. So those that say that when Yisro came, he didn't only come with Tzipporah, he came with his sons. Now we don't know that he had sons. That after Moshe arrived on the scene, it seems that he had sons. Now we also know that he had daughters. When we originally meet Yisro, he had 7 daughters. Tzipporah was the youngest of the 7. Where were the other 6 girls? Did they remain in Midian? And was it that after everything that happened and a change of philosophy, and learning for a year of Torah and being convinced that this was the emes, this was the way to come to a correct realization about how the world runs and who created the world, that he felt obligated to go back minimally to take care of his immediate family, to give them the privilege that he had, even though it meant leaving the yeshiva at a certain point in time. That's what he did. And that's what he did. He went back, and his efforts successful? So it seems that they were. There's a pasuk in Shoftim. If you look it up, it's in Sefer Shoftim, Perak Aleph, pasuk Zayin. There's a pasuk that's not really clear. B'nei Keni, Chosei Moshe, the children of Keni, who was the father-in-law of Moshe, Alu mi'ir hatmarim. They went up from Yericho. They had been in Yericho. They had been given land in Yericho. What do you mean they were given land? How did the children of Yisro get to be with the Jewish people? Didn't Yisro left? Didn't he leave? Es b'nei Yehuda midbar Yehuda asher b'negev arad vayelech vayeshev es ha'am. Right? So what did they do? It seems that they left Yericho, which is even till today a city of water, a city of Tamarim, and they went to the Negev. They went to the south. They went to the Midbar, to a desert. So Rashi says, what did they do? They left the plush city of Yericho, and they went right. V'hochu Eitza Asniel ben Kenaz. They went to the yeshiva of Asniel ben Kenaz, right? Lilmod Torah. They went there to learn Torah. And in fact, if you look in Chazal, they talk about the fact that there are other famous personalities that came out of Yisrael that were members of Sanhedrin until the time that the Sanhedrin stopped. That it seemed that Yisro changed philosophy. He realized that trial and error, it's good for Yechidim, but it's not good for the general population. The best way to do it, to come to the awareness of Kadosh Baruch Hu, is to study the gift that God had given. And in fact, why Yisro was also bothered. Why, if the Torah was so important, why did God wait 2,000 years to give it to us? Because we had to be ready for it. We had to realize that human logic isn't going to work all the time. That only Yechidim came to realization of the truth. It was time for everybody to do it. He changed viewpoints. And in fact, this will help us understand a difficult Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah says, this is Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Tet. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, Hamahalech v'derech v'shonef. What happens? You're on a bus. You're going on a way, and you're learning. You're taking a sefer and you're learning. Umavsik mi mishnato, and you interrupt your learning. V'yomer, and you say, Ma noa ilan zeh. You look out the window and you say, wow. You look at nature, wow. Look at this beautiful view. Or ma noa nir zeh. Look at this beautiful farmland. Right? The beauty of the world, of the creation. So if you do that, if you appreciate nature, what does the God think of you? Says the Mishnah, Ma'alalav hakasuv kilu mitchayav benafsha. You're committing spiritual suicide. You might as well be killed. What is the Mishnah talking about? We know that there's a bracha that one makes when you see, right, the ocean, you see majestic mountains, you see the Grand Canyon, you see the beauty of creation. You're supposed to make a bracha. It's supposed to bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What are you telling me? If I appreciate nature, I'm a chayav misa. So I once heard in the name of Reb Soloveitchik, a beautiful pshat on this Mishnah. It says, it doesn't say you're not supposed to appreciate nature. Of course you're supposed to appreciate nature. Of course that's a way to get to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if you have to look again at every word in the Mishnah. What was the person doing before he looked at nature? You were in the middle of learning. Hamavsik Mishnah, so you close the sefer, as if to say, I have a better way to come to Kadosh Baruch Hu, not through learning. I'm going to go appreciate nature from logic. I'm going to look at the order in the world. I'm going to study physics. I'm going to study biology. I'm going to see the godless of creation, and that's going to give me awareness of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah, that could, that should, and you should do that, but not at the expense of learning, not at the expense of learning. In fact, there's a famous story. They tell it differently in the circles of YU versus the circles of Lubavitch, that it seems that the Rav and the Lubavitch Rebbe once went to the same class in university. And the Rav was there, and you see the Rebbe was there. The Rebbe, in the middle of class, he wasn't paying attention. Didn't seem to be paying attention to what the lecturer was saying. He had Sfarim open. He was learning. And yet the Rebbe got straight A's. Yeah? Rav couldn't understand how he was able to do that. And from what I understand, I heard that when I told over the story to a friend of mine who was a Lubavitcher, he said, yeah, they know the story, because the Rebbe was given permission to go to university by his father-in-law only if it did not involve Bittul Torah. So the only way he can go to a lecture was if he was learning at the same time. The Rebbe was able to do two things at the same time. Right? Because, yeah, you can go to university, you can learn, but once the Torah was given, then it pulled away from the approach of Yisro. Logic, yeah, the world should have looked at creation and come to realization there had to be one God who organized everything. Yes, if we would be smart enough, if we'd be objective enough, we should have been able to. But for 2,000 years, we tried that approach. It didn't work for 99% of the population. Now I'm going to make it easy for you. Here's the Torah. The Torah is if you want to discover who God is, the way to find out, here's the blueprint. Here's who I am. Here's the way to discover me. And that becomes way number one, the most assured way to coming to a correct conclusion of what reality in life is all about. And I just want to say it's interesting that this debate between Yisro and Moshe about how their children should be educated, Torah versus trial and error, is really a debate that goes on even today in our own society. I know there's one of the most popular pastimes, especially what's going on today, is to put down Haredim. And unfortunately, they gave us a lot of material as to why perhaps we should be critical, especially during Corona, of some of the conclusions of Haredim we're going through. But the idea of a Haredi education versus allowing children to be open to the world, it's not so pashut. It's really not so pashut. Moshe's kids, who were brought up originally by Yisro, they may have been nice people. Right? We don't know, but we don't know anything except for their names that we're told in this week's Parshat. Right? We don't know anything about it, at least within the Torah. And when you get into Nach a little bit, then maybe there are things what to say, but not necessarily positive. But within the Torah, nothing. Become nice, from Jews, kippas, ruga on their head, nice balabatim, but nothing special. They weren't Yehoshua's, they weren't Pinchas's, it's not so clear what education is correct and how we have to view, opening up the outside world to our children. Anyway, but not for now. Last point. One more point to compare to Kabbalas Torah. Not only is this story, again, according to those that say that Yisro came after Matan Torah, then why in the world is the whole story before Matan Torah? Is to tell you because in order to be Makabel Torah, you have to go through the same process as Yisro. You need to be trial. You have to be a person who's looking for truth. You have to be a person that when you find the truth, you don't hesitate to go run after it and don't postpone making important decisions until a later time, which is more convenient, because once you postpone that, it's not going to happen. Yisro is the only one who, after all the miracles that he saw in Yitro, the only one that comes to join the Jewish people. That's a frightening, frightening thought. But there's one more thing, because it's not the only, we're not only told that he came. There's a whole parsha that happens after he comes. If you were Moshe Rabbeinu and you knew that you were to prepare for the greatest religious experience of your life, for Kabbalas Torah, what would you do? Probably do what a Kohen Gadol did prior to the Avodah on Yom Kippurim. I would separate from public life. I would go into a closed room, meditate, think about who I am, think about the mitzvahs I had beforehand, right? And remove myself totally from worldly matters. Only get involved in spiritual matters. But yet, that's not what happened. Was one of the first things that Yisro sees when he comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. He sees him sitting and judging, judging cases, litigation between different people from Me'aboker ad ha'erev. His whole life is not involved in his personal preparation to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but involved in the community affairs. Point number one. And then what else does he see? Again, in Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Zion, it says, Vayetze Moshe likrat chosno, right? So Yisro sends him a message. We're on the way. We're coming. So if I knew that Yisro is a couple minutes out, well, and my wife and my children are coming, what would be my first response? So I know my first response would probably be, better clean up this tent quickly, because if your wife sees what's going on now, you're in a lot of trouble. Make my bed, maybe try to find out, instead of all the munchies that I have in the refrigerator, put in some healthy food, that she'll have something to eat when she gets here, clean the carpet. That's what I would have done. And wait for him to come, knock on the door, and wait for him to come. No. Vayetze Moshe likrat chot. No, Moshe, you're the king. You're the person who just brought the Jewish people out. Yisro's a nobody, relatively speaking. You go out to meet him, he should come out to meet you. He should come in to meet you. Vayishtachu vayishak lo vayishalu ish l'rayeu l'shalom. And he bowed down to him and he kissed him. Now, it doesn't say who kissed who. Rashi brings up this problem. Who kissed? Was it Yisro to kiss Moshe? Moshe kissed Yisro, and he proves that it was Moshe who kissed Yisro. He bowed. Moshe's the one bowing down to his father-in-law. He's not getting any money from his father-in-law at this point in time. Why is he buying down to him? Should be the opposite. And then in Pasuk Yud Beis, it says, Perak Yud Ches Pasuk Yud Beis. Later on, it says, when Yisro hears about everything that went on, he has Yechidus with Moshe Rabbeinu, hears about everything that happened. And Yisro says, I realize now that God is true and I'm coming to join you. Vayikach Yisro Chosei Moshe Olos Vachim Leilokim. Yisro, the father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrificed it to God. Here is one of the psukim that people bring, that it had to be after Matan Torah. There was no Mishkan there. There was no Mizbeach yet. But anyway, Vayavo Aaron v'kol ziknei Yisrael lecholechem im chosei Moshe lefnei Elokim. Who's coming to join Yisro on this party? Aaron v'kol ziknei Yisrael. And once again, Rashi's bothered. What do you mean? Vayavo Aaron v'kol ziknei Yisrael. There's one guest that's missing. Moshe hechan holach. Where was Moshe? Wasn't he invited to the party? V'lohu sheyotze l'krosov v'gam los kol kavod. It was Moshe who went out to greet him. He caused all the kavod that everybody else came out to greet him with Moshe was because of Moshe. Where was he? No, my father-in-law is throwing the party. I have to make sure I'm the caterer. I have to make sure that everything is all right. I'm supervising the entire event. I'm not sitting down and getting out of with him and enjoying the event. Moshe is serving Yisro. And finally, right, where we have the whole story of Moshe, when Yosef sees him working Yom V'Layla, and maybe he did think that that's not a great thing for my wife, and that he's never home. So he tries to tell him, you can't continue doing this thing, and he gives him advice on what he should do and how he should judge cases. So in Perak Yud Ches Pasuk Chav Daled, it says, Vayishma Moshe l'kol chotno v'yas kol asher amar. Moshe actually listened to the advice of Yisro. Now, Yisro didn't give him great advice up till now. I mean, the idea of raising my kids for Zorah, I have my own philosophy, educational philosophy. Moshe knows in that Torah. He knows what he's doing. He knows what God wants him to do. If he made a mistake, God should have said something. But he listens to Moshe, to Yisro. So what's the point here? What point is the Torah trying to make? Or another important point in preparation for Kabbalas HaTorah. Not only intellectually, you have to be striving for truth and open and objective to see reality. Emotionally, what type of people become into Torah? Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah. That's why every Gemara starts with Daf Beis. Why doesn't the Gemara start with Daf Aleph? We always learn these reasons in kindergarten, because there's always something that you have to know before you open up a book, and that's Derech Eretz. There has to be desire to not only learn the facts of Torah, but to have Torah make you godlike. You have to want to become more spiritual, right? A better human being, more sensitive, more caring, more giving, right? I want to be willing to say that, objectively, I have certain character flaws that I want to work on. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu does pre-Matan Torah. He works on giving to people, and it could explain why the emphasis, it's always bothered me in the beginning of the story, when he goes out to meet his father-in-law, goes out to serve his father-in-law. What about his wife and children? That could be a given. The fact that he has to take care of his family, hopefully that's a given. I don't want to go to the point that maybe he ignored them. But the Kiddush is, even for his father-in-law, who was a Kohen Midian, the covet that he gives him, that is an amazing thing. And he takes time out from his busy schedule, pre-Matan Torah, to spend so much time with him. Because Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah. That's what God wants us to. God is like that. And we have to become godlike. And in fact, I'd like to even go a step further. That this idea of Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah is not only important pre-Matan Torah, it should be important post-Matan Torah. That when we become from, we shouldn't become too uppity, right? And give up on what from Kedis. There's a famous story that I always like to tell. Unfortunately, a true story. I was Masada Kedushin at a wedding of a Talmud of mine in Long Island, and in the middle of the waiting for the chassan to come out. It was a nice summer day. Me and two or three of other people will walk outside. We were on the front of the wedding hall on the steps, and what we see is as follows: that a car pulls up, and out of the wedding hall, one of the bridesmaids comes down. She goes down the steps, a lot of steps coming up to this wedding hall, and opens up the trunk of the car and pulls out this really heavy suitcase. And she's having difficulty schlepping the suitcase up the steps. And I see three yeshiva guys there, right? Black, hats, wireframe glasses, and they see the girl. Not one of them bothers to help her schlep the suitcase. And it's clear she's having trouble schlepping it up, helping her schlep up the suitcase up the stairs. So I said, okay, listen, I'll do it. I go over, can I help you? Yeah, sure. I take the suitcase, put it up the stairs, and help her to take it to the cloakroom. Then I come back. Should I say anything to these guys? Those who know me, I have difficulty keeping my mouth shut. I go over to him. I says, hey, hi, guys. Hi, do you know who I am? He says, well, we don't know you personally, but know you were the Masada Kedushin, yeah, the Rebbe of our friend, the Chassan. I said, do you happen to see this girl come up with the suitcase? I said, yeah. You saw that she was having problems with it? Yeah, we saw it. So why didn't one of you bother to help her? Passionate. She's a girl, from wise, we know. I said, guys, you violated two averas. Number one, baltashas. God provided you an opportunity. This girl, again, objectively, maybe I'm wrong, seems cute. She's a bridesmaid. She's obviously marriage age. She's friends of the Kala. You friends of the Chassan. Maybe God was providing you for an opportunity for your shidduch, and you blew it. Baltashas. And number two is chesed. I didn't ask you to have yichud with the girl. I didn't ask you even to look at her. You could have gone down, put your head down, keep your head down. Can I help you? Take her a suitcase, and you had an opportunity for a chesed. You blew it. And frumkeit doesn't mean, when you look, Kabbalah Satorah doesn't mean you become more, isolated and narcissistic and into yourself. Frumkeit means looking at the world around you like the way Moshe did, and becoming more godlike. And in conclusion, so I'm going to quote two more, right? If the whole Parshat is talking about, and the reason why we hear about Yitro coming pre-Matan Torah, even if he came after Matan Torah, is because there are lessons required that we need to know before we can have a successful Kabbalah Satorah. There's two lessons at the end of the Parshat that are important to know very quickly. Talk about building a Mizbeach. Forget about the relevance and how it ties in here. When you make a Mizbeach, you're making a stone Mizbeach, you can't chisel the stones using metal. Because if you do, you're going to profane the sanctity of the Mizbeach. What does it mean, b'tchaluleh? So Rashi says as follows, that he the Mizbeach is built to create a connection between you and God, to extend our life on this world. But metal was used for weapons that are used to shorten one's time on this world. It's inappropriate for something which has never connotations to be used to create something with positive connotations. Now, think about it. A stone was probably there. These boulders were there from the time of creation, a couple thousand years old. How much time is it going to be, contact between the negative metal and the stone? A minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes out of 2,000 years that preceded it? It's going to have such a negative effect. You want to have a successful Kabbalah Satorah? Point number one. You want to come close to Kadosh Baruch. You want to build a mizbeach, a personal mizbeach. You avoid all negatives in life, even for a short amount of time, even if it's for a year or it's for a weekend. You never know the ramifications of an encounter with negative influences. Point number one. And point number two, last pasuk in the parsha. Lo tala b'malot al-mizbechi. When you go up to the mizbeach, the mizbeach was high off the ground. The access point to get up to the top of the mizbeach was not via steps. It was with a ramp. And the Torah goes on to give a reason, maybe a halachic reason why not. I once heard again, we started with my Rebbe, beginning of this year, from Nissen Alpert, Zichron Livracha. My other Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Bezdin, Zichron Livracha, had a beautiful vort on this. Why was the access to the Mizbeach in the form of a ramp rather than the forms of steps? He says for a very simple reason. When you have steps, you go up the steps, you get tired. You decide to take a break. You sit down and you rest. And you rest 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and when you regain your strength and you decide to continue your journey upwards, you continue for the exact same point that you left off. That's true with steps, but that's not true with a ramp. And a ramp, if you don't continue your forward motion, not only are you not going forward, you slide all the way back down. In your quest towards coming to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every day has to be significant. It doesn't mean every day is going to be as good as the other days. When you're learning Yeshua for the year, you have 10 hours of learning every day. That's not going to happen once you get married and get a job. You can't do that. But every day, you have to take one more step up that ramp. And if you don't continue going further, but you just rely on what you did in the past, not only you're not going forward, you're just going to slip. That's not the way to go. So when you're preparing for Kabbalah Satorah, and you finally realize the significance the Torah has to give you, and you know that this is the MS, two things you have to do to maintain that. Right? Not only, first of all, you have to come and join it, but you get away from everything that's negative as much as possible. And every single day, not a day should go by without some type of connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Halavai, we should be zocheh to learn the lessons from this week's parsha, that we too should have a successful Kabbalah Satorah in our lives, right? And learn from lessons that Yitro and Moshe taught us. Shabbat Shalom.